Hi, everyone. Having recovered from the recent disaster, recording a whole series of video lectures for you, none of which had any audio necessitating recording them all again, I am back with you once again, giving lie to the idea that technology makes life easier. I want to talk today about chapters 2 and 3 of your textbook because we have some disconcerting pileup of facts going on here. As you read your textbook, I want you to remember that you don't have to remember all these details. My job is to facilitate the major questions in this class. As you read chapters 2, 3, and all chapters thereafter, remember that we are asking ourselves questions that we can answer simply. And that is, so far we're looking at the formation of the set of ideas and values that we refer to as Western. And it's our job in this class. So which of these Greek ideas are influential and become part of what we think of as Western civilization and Western culture? So if we look at the Greeks, we can highlight several different motifs, several different themes, and one of those is political organization. We've talked about the polis, the basic political unit of the Greek society. If you look in chapter 2 and the rise of Greek civilization, there's a discussion of Panhellenism, where the Greeks, because of their unique experience, they went through several different definitions and self-definitions, and they put some of these ideas into action, experimenting with them, and came up with conclusions. So Panhellenism is the way that these ideas, these practices that we're going to discuss, spread. Panhellenism is the idea that when the Greeks went out to set up their colonies, they had different cultural identities and practices they took with them. And this is how some of these ideas, many of them become part of the currency of the Western tradition, is through the spreading in the industry, in the colonies, Panhellenism, very important term. So the Greeks have experience, as we see on page 42 and 43, with tyranny, with very strong rulers that institute control based on trying to keep down class conflict, trying to keep down discord in society, so they rule with a very strong hand. But the Greeks decide this is against their idea of the polis, against the development of what will later soon in this unit become, in this chapter, become democracy. The tyranny was inimical, was contradictory to the idea of the polis. So the Greeks are developing notions like rights and citizenship as they go along. Now, there's two different ways you can organize a society, and two different social models that become the basis of the West. All right, and one of those is Sparta. The other is Athens. Both Greek city-states, but they organized themselves based on different ideas. Now, the Spartans, because of the rebellions and the revolts and the war and the helots and the and so on and so forth, they felt necessary to organize their society along the lines of militarism. The highest value in Sparta was military service, military values of strength, of masculinity, of competition, and things like this. So the Spartans turned their city into a military academy and camp, and every male was supposed to be a soldier. The state decided which which male babies and female babies too were strong enough to be born, and to not to be born but to survive after they were born. So the males had to be strong enough to fight. The females had to be strong enough to give birth to soldiers, or to future soldiers' mothers and wives. This is a very patriarchal, male-dominated society because the idea of physical strength, of courage, of the hero, of machismo and all these things, testosterone, were the basic values of the society. So Spartan boys were taken away from their parents at the age of 7, turned over to military instructors, trained in athletics, military arts, taught to endure pain, privation, hunger, live off the country, to reconnoiter, right, to forage in military terms. At age of 20, he was enrolled in the army after his service in the Spartan youth, like the Hitler youth, right? When he gets to be 20, he's enrolled in the army. If he serves satisfactorily at age 30, because of his military service, he becomes a citizen. He was allowed to marry, but that wasn't the primary value. He was a soldier. He had to sneak off to see his wife. Only at age of 60, when he retired from the military and became a private citizen, could he be with his home and his family and retire. So the Spartan society had you till you were 60 years old. All right. That was a powerful commitment to military service and its values. The Spartans, militarist. Athenians were not like that. They organized themselves along the lines of democracy. So there's a discussion about Athenian democracy in Chapter 2. In Chapter 3, how it came about, the idea of citizenship, who is included. In the Athenian experience, tyranny led to democracy. They decided they didn't like tyranny, so they developed the idea that we have rights that are being taken away. They developed certain rights. For example, the freedom of speech, the freedom of petition, the freedom of assembly. These values in the American Revolution, in the French Revolution, and other revolutions, and the package of what we call democracy, what we call representative democracy, freedom, all these things came out of that Greek experience, spread through Pan-Hellenism because the Greeks, because of certain aspects of their situation, put these into practice, experimented with them, and they became influential hallmarks of what we call Western civilization. So there's a discussion of the poetry and all these things, the aristocratic ideas, the morality, the religion, all these things. Don't worry about these wars too much. The main idea of the war, of the Ionian rebellion and so forth, the threat of the Persians, is that it split Athens and Sparta. They fought against each other. Athens won some, Sparta won some. I'm not going to ask you to describe the Ionian rebellion and the war with the Persia and so forth. That's not what's important for our purposes, although it's interesting. The point is that in these wars, both these societies have to define and redefine themselves. Who are we? What do we want? And what are we going to do about these other guys? Right? So all these wars with the Persians, the Ionians, all these different people, leads into the Greek world splitting into two spheres of influence. One, Spartan, the ideas of militarism. Two, Athens, the ideas of democracy. All right. Germany, for example, in 1871, when the militarist Prussian state decided through warfare to create this entity called Germany of different kingdoms, they militarized the whole country. They organized the whole country of Germany based on the ideas and the values of militarism. It leads to 2 world wars. Right? Other countries decide we don't want to be militaristic, we want to be democratic. Other societies, developments of democracy later, say that you had to have elements of both of democracy and militarism. So when we look at Athenian democracy in Chapter 3 on pages 63, 64, 65, you see its development and what it became. That the Persians had destroyed Athens, so the Athenians meet. They call for this Pan-Hellenic Congress. They get together and they decide, what do we want? Who are we? How do we want our society formed? So they don't want tyranny. They know that. They want democracy, and they decide to organize themselves into small political unions called demes, or demes. You can pronounce it either way, but it's the basis for democracy, all right? Self-rule. So in practice, everyone in Athens, every male in Athens was equal. Women were not given a role in society. They were very limited. Slavery, of course, existed in Athens. So you have democracy and non-democracy at the same time. But in practice, at least, no one was prevented from serving in office because of his class, because of his wealth. That officially, at least, all Athenians were more or less equal. Now, looking on page 64, how did democracy work? The Athenian democracy is truly a remarkable achievement, and it's more democratic than what we have today in the U.S. or England or Germany or anywhere, because their popular assembly was a collection of all the people, not their representatives, and they approved every decision of the state. So it'd be like you and I going to Frankfurt and saying to Mitch McConnell, hey, we're going to Congress in Washington, D.C., and being there on the floor of Congress and saying to Mitch McConnell, we don't like what you did. Go back and do it over. It's popular sovereignty, the sovereignty of the people. The people, the people propose legislation. Our representatives were there with their representatives, making sure it gets done. If we don't like it, we say we don't like that, do it over, you messed up, whatever. But the people have all power and authority in Athens. And, it's amazing. Every judicial decision was subject to appeal to a popular court chosen from a panel of jurors widely representative of the Athenian population. Most officials were selected by lot without regard to class or wealth or income. Public officials were subject to scrutiny before taking office, while serving, and could be removed at any point if they did not do what they were supposed to do. They also were held to compulsory examination and accounting. At the end of their term, they had to justify what they did before they did it, while they were doing it, after it was done. So this is a popular assembly. with popular sovereignty, judicial oversight, impeachment, recall, accountability, voluntary civic virtue, participation by everybody, and no police or army, no force. That's truly incredible democracy. It's important to note it didn't last too long, did it? Because of outside pressures and invasions and militarism, and constant struggle with Sparta, constant struggle with with other places around the world, with other countries, with Persia especially. So what we see in this class is a period in which democracy is limited. And it was already limited, wasn't it? If slavery existed in this democracy, if women were not allowed to function, to take part in public life, if they were under the control of male guardians at all times, it wasn't really democratic anyway. But it was more representative than most of what we think about as democracy. On 66 and 67, there's two views of democracy. Pericles' funeral oration, which praises democracy, and Pseudo-Xenophon, his Constitution of the Athenians, a criticism of democracy, that it's a rabble of the basest sort that rule, that these inferior people drag society down with them, and you can't trust the masses, you can't trust the mob. Those are the main two arguments for and against democracy that have been around for as long as people have proposed democracy. You still hear them today, and we're going to revisit those in this class. So, Athens does fall. Sparta, the militaristic state, eventually does kind of take over, doesn't it? It wins the day. So hey, maybe the world is based on power. Maybe you have to have power to have your experiment, your nation to last. Even in Athens, there was tension. In the culture of classical Greece, this terrific architecture and comedy and drama and sculpture and philosophy, there's a big tension. There's two sources of tension on page 72. The first is the tension, but between the pride of the Greeks and what they'd accomplished and the worry that it might end at any point. They might have overreached. It might not work. It might be destroyed. It might fall apart. It might not work. The second tension was between the individual and the collective. Between individual citizens and the claims and limits that their fellow citizens in the polis, in the state, in the democracy put on them. So often art was a social forum, it was a social critique, it was a tension between the individual and society that was expressed in a variety of ways. And of course, philosophy is basically asking simple questions like, what is the best way to live? What is the best way to understand life and reality? And how do we organize societies best? How can we live the best that we can possibly live? There was a tension between philosophical ideas like materialism and idealism. There is a real stress on skepticism, on reason, on rationality, on observation. These all become hallmarks of Western civilization. So please do read chapter 3 about these things. I'm not going to ask you to remember the differences between Plato and Aristotle because these questions about the nature of the state and human life and reality and thought and how best to live, these are questions that we all ask ourselves, whether we're influenced by the West or not. But nevertheless, there's this belief in Greece, in Athens at least, that people are at least somewhat equal. And through education, people can be active participants and citizens. And of course, those presumptions, those traditions of Greek, of Western civilization, become part of that Western canon of thought, although they're altered in a variety of ways. But ironically, what really ended Greek democracy was not Sparta, but was other people taking on these Greek ideas. The Macedonians were Greek as well, but they were much different. The Greek culture had spread indirectly to them, and Philip of Macedon and his son Alexander the Great really spread these Greek ideas through military conquest and warfare, which is not how they were supposed to be spread. But I guess you could say that Sparta kind of won, didn't it? And so the spreading of these ideas through the military conquest was a serious thing, because can democracy be spread at the point of a gun? Should we force people to accept democracy? Those are questions that we ask ourselves to this day. Should we have gone to war with Iraq and Afghanistan? Will American-style participatory democracy work there? Those are big questions. There's no easy answer. But the invasion of the Macedonians did end Greek freedom and autonomy, and the Greek culture became a sort of a neo-Hellenism, not the original thing at all, but an alteration of it. And Alexander the Great puts together this huge empire based on sort of altered versions, decontextualized, sort of a decontextualized version of the Greek ideas. And he conquers most of the known world, all the way over from he conquers Persia, for example, everything from Macedonia all the way over to Afghanistan. Alexander the Great conquers. He only stops at India when the Chandragupta Mauryan kings in BC 320 stop him, and then Alexander dies. For the next 75 years, his generals split up his empire and rule it pretty well. There was a very long period of vying between these people for a number of years. Alexander's generals splitting up his empire, but eventually, as it says on page 84, there were 3 Macedonian generals that set up dynasties. One in Ptolemy I in Egypt. Cleopatra was the last version of the last ruler of that dynasty that dated back to Alexander. There was Seleucus the first, the Seleucid dynasty of Mesopotamia. There was Antigonus, the founder of a dynasty in Asia Minor and Macedon, and for about 75 years or so, Alexander's empire, under the leadership of his generals, did last and brought a lot of prosperity, but it was not evenly distributed. There was a lot of inequality in these states, in this empire, and eventually the economic pressures, the clashes between the rich and the poor, the demands for redistribution of land, civil war, the demand for the abolition of debt caused instability in these empires, and they collapsed. And by the middle of the 2nd century, Antony and Cleopatra, there we go. That ties together Alexandrian world empire and Rome. Because by the middle of 2nd century BC, all except for Egypt, under the rule of the Ptolemies, Cleopatra, had been overthrown by the expanding power of Rome. And so that is the next dynasty, the next world system that we will get to in chapter 4. So there is again a discussion there of Hellenistic culture after the Alexandrian conquest. The Greeks turned aside from democracy. They felt helpless. They resigned to fate. They started to recognize that forces in the world were too great for humans to manage. They sought refuge in hedonism, in nihilism, the idea that nothing matters. They retreated into religion, philosophy, magic. New schools of thought like the Epicureans and the Stoics came along and didn't believe in much of anything, believed that people should find pleasure. In the case of the Epicureans or the Stoics, believed that you should withdraw from the world. You should become free from passion. You should be, as much as you could, neutral and accept life as it is and try to live as best you could within it. So you should live in harmony with natural law and the world around you. There was a lot of great literature, architecture, sculpture, mathematics, and science that came out of this. And of course, much later on, the West is going to have these, Western Europe is going to take up these things. The Greek and the Roman mathematics and arts and sciences in their Arabic translations, when we encounter them in Muslim civilizations, which we will see in later on in Europe, were much superior to barbarian Western Europe civilizations. So these Roman and Greek ideas do percolate, and of course Rome itself builds itself directly on the blueprint of Greece. The Romans take this this pan-Hellenism, this neo-Hellenism is filtered through Alexander and filtered through the Macedonians, and they take it and they make it their own, and it becomes Roman. You probably know that they took all of the Greek gods and renamed them. So Jupiter became Mercury, Mercury became Jupiter. I forget which is which. I'm not up on my pagan mythologies. I'm sorry about that. But Rome builds itself directly on that tradition of the Greek tradition as filtered through Philip and Alexander of Macedon, Alexander the Great. So Italy actually comes out of the Etruscans, as it says in page 4. So please do remember these basic guides and rubrics as you read through your textbooks. And now that the technology disaster has been surpassed and I've had to work twice as hard, I'm going to post a lecture on chapters 4 and 5 in just a couple of days. So please do watch out for that and read up into chapters 2 and 3, amalgamate them together, and then get up into chapter 4. If you have any questions or concerns or need any more help, or if anything is unclear to you, please do contact me through email, or my number is, my phone numbers are both on the syllabus. Don't hesitate to contact me. Remember that I do not give homework. I don't give busy work. Read your textbook, watch these lectures, study, go along with the study notes that I post for you, and fill in your study guide and get ready for the first exam. That is your homework. That is your permanent work. You're always supposed to be doing that. If there's anything I can do to help you or assist you, please do contact me. Okay, look for the next lecture in a couple of days.